Part 3. The silence after fire. When the storm of sorrow finally ended, the forest was no longer the same. The flames had died, the thunder had passed, and the wind no longer carried the sound of fire. Yet what remained was even harder to bear than the night of terror itself. Silence. A silence so deep that it felt like the earth itself had stopped breathing. The animals who had survived crept out from their hiding places with slow and uncertain steps. They had fled to the riverbanks, to caves, or to the far edges of the forest where the fire could not follow. Now they returned, their eyes wide with disbelief, as they saw what had become of their once beautiful paradise. The tall green trees that had touched the sky were gone. In their place stood blackened skeletons, broken and twisted, reaching upward like hands frozen in pain. The fresh green leaves were no more. The branches were bare, stripped of life, covered only in soot and ash. The air that once carried the fragrance of flowers was heavy with smoke, a bitter smell that stung the nose and burned the lungs. The rivers, once crystal clear, were now dark and polluted. Ash floated on their surface, and the fish that had once danced in the sunlight lay lifeless, carried by the current. The ground, which had been soft with grass and flowers, was now hard and cracked, covered in black dust that clung to the paws and hooves of the animals as they walked. No butterflies fluttered, no bees hummed, no fireflies glowed. The birds, usually the messengers of morning, perched silently on the remains of burned branches. Their wings were heavy, their eyes empty. They no longer sang. The monkeys, who had once filled the forest with laughter, sat close together, their arms wrapped around one another, staring at the ruins of their playground. The deer, usually graceful and calm, now trembled with every sound, their heads lowered in sorrow. Even the tigers, the proud rulers of the jungle, moved slowly, their roars replaced by silence. The elephants, protectors of the forest, walked among the ruins with heavy steps, their trunks lowered to the ground in mourning. It was as if the heart of the forest had stopped beating. The harmony was gone, the music lost, and the laughter silenced. What remained was emptiness. Days passed, and the silence only grew heavier. The animals searched for food, but there was little to be found. The grass had burned away, the fruit trees were gone, and the rivers no longer carried enough fish. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, thirst dried their throats, and the youngest among them cried out in despair. Mothers searched desperately for something to feed their little ones. Birds flew far in search of berries, but returned with empty beaks. Deer wandered for miles, only to find dust and ashes where green fields had once been. Even the elephants, who could pull down branches and dig for roots, struggled to find enough to share. Thirst was worse than hunger. The rivers that had always been a source of life were now poisoned with ash. The water tasted bitter, and many animals grew sick after drinking it. The little ones coughed and grew weak, their eyes dull with exhaustion. Some animals grew too tired to walk and lay down on the burned earth, waiting for strength that never came. The forest that had once been a paradise now felt like a prison. Everywhere the animals looked, they saw reminders of what they had lost. A broken branch that had once been full of flowers. A pile of ash where a tree had once stood tall. A burned nest hanging from a blackened branch, empty and lifeless. Memories filled their hearts, but those memories only brought more sorrow. The wise old owl, who had survived the fire, sat silently on a charred stump. His feathers were no longer clean and shining. They were marked with soot and smoke. He watched the forest and the animals, his eyes full of sadness, yet deep within them still a spark of patience. He knew that time could heal, that life had its way of returning, but he also knew that the road ahead would be long and painful. The younger animals could not understand. They asked their elders, "Why did the forest burn? Why did the fire come? Will the flowers return? Will we ever sing again?" The elders had no answers. They only lowered their heads in sorrow, unable to explain why such a tragedy had happened. The silence was not only in the forest, but in the hearts of its creatures. Once, they had spoken to each other in joy, shared food, and celebrated the beauty around them. Now their voices were heavy, their words short, their eyes distant. Fear had settled among them, a fear that the paradise they had once known was gone forever. Night fell, but even the nights were no longer the same. Without trees, the forest could not hide its wounds. The moonlight revealed the black scars of the earth, the broken branches, the empty spaces where life had once thrived. The animals huddled together for warmth, their bodies close, but their hearts cold with despair. The owls no longer sang, the wolves no longer howled, the crickets no longer chirped. Even the wind seemed unwilling to pass through the dead trees. The young animals who had been born after the fire saw the forest differently. To them, the green sprouts and the patches of flowers were not signs of loss, but signs of life. They had never known the paradise of the past. To them, this forest, though scarred, was still a wonder. Their eyes shone with curiosity, their steps were full of play, and their laughter reminded the older animals that life always moves forward. One evening, as the sun set in gold and crimson, the animals gathered at the riverbank. The wise old owl looked at them and spoke. "My friends, we have suffered greatly. We lost much, and we still struggle. But look around you. The forest breathes again. The rivers sing again. The flowers bloom again. This is not the forest we once had, but it is a forest we have built together. And together, it will grow strong." The silence was complete. But silence has two faces. One is sorrow, heavy and painful. The other is waiting, quiet and patient. Though the animals did not know it, beneath the ashes seeds were hidden. Tiny seeds, buried in the soil, protected from the fire, waiting for the right moment to wake. The earth had not given up. Life had not been fully destroyed. The fire had stolen much, but it had not taken everything. The owl, wise as always, could feel this truth. He closed his eyes and whispered softly to himself, "The forest is wounded, but it will not die. Time will heal, and hope will return." But the others did not hear him. To them, his words would have been just another sound swallowed by the silence. The days stretched into weeks, and the silence remained. Hunger continued to trouble the animals, thirst continued to weaken them, and sorrow weighed down their spirits. Many wondered if it was better to leave, to wander into the unknown in search of a new home. But even as they thought of leaving, their hearts ached. For this was not just a forest. This was their birthplace, their shelter, their paradise. To abandon it felt like abandoning themselves. And so, they stayed. They stayed in the silence, waiting, not knowing what they were waiting for. The forest stood like a graveyard, yet beneath the ashes, hidden from all eyes, life waited quietly. The silence was heavy, but it was not forever.